Well, welcome everyone. James gave an excellent introduction. I really appreciate you all being here on this beautiful day. Today, as we said, we're going to talk about soft skills for software engineers. This is about how to balance those hard skills that we talk about all the time in meetings like this with some soft skills that will help accelerate your engineering career. But of course, we wouldn't be here without our sponsor, which is Diligent. So Diligent is a company that connects risk, compliance, audits. And what does that mean for an engineer? Well, it means that we get to work for a company that produces enterprise software that deploys to over 15,000 organizations worldwide. That includes non-government organizations like charities, government organizations, and private companies. What's really cool about Diligent is that we build on the next generation of the technical stack, things like AWS, serverless, event-driven architecture. I was just recently chatting with an old boss of mine who works at another company. He was describing his tech stack, and it turns out that the challenges that his company is facing now are the technical challenges that Diligent faced 10 years ago. So it's a really great place to hone your skills and understand the next generation of software development. What's also awesome about working for Diligent is we have a highly motivated team members, as well as inspirational servant-based leadership. I really love my colleagues and the people that I get to work with, as well as something that's really important to me is it's a big company in the sense of it's very stable, but there's still that energy and growth prospects that the startup gives you, right? So it's a really, really exciting company to work for. The reason why I keep talking about working for is because we're hiring. So if you go to diligent.com/company/careers, you can see we're hiring for a director role, a principal role, an R&D manager role, and a senior role. If you keep looking at that website, you will see multiple other job opportunities coming in over the coming months and years. So please do check that out. If you do send an application, just remember that me, Greg Gzik, recommended you. Wink, wink. Good friends. Promise I'll put in the good word. Okay, with that, it's time to get on to the main topic, which is this Reddit thread, of course. That's why we're here, right? To read Reddit. Well, the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is a thread from a junior engineer. This engineer has been working in the industry for a little over a year, is very confident about his technical skills, but yet is having trouble getting promoted. The question is why, right? He talked to his manager and his manager said, well, okay, you're great on all the technical stuff, but what you really need to improve on is things like communication, having more confidence, gaining more experience, understanding how to work more efficiently. And rather than using this as an opportunity to learn, the engineer used this as an opportunity to sort of curse the world and say, you know what, soft skills shouldn't matter, right? It should just be about the code. But this perspective really misses an important feature of the job market, which is that it's true that hard skills get you a great job, but soft skills are what gets you great opportunities in that role. So the combination of both is what gets you the successful and rewarding engineering career. We're going to focus on how to leverage those great opportunities within your role so that you can find your career rewarding. So first off, why should you trust me? Who am I, right? I look like I've got this baby face, look like I'm not particularly experienced, and partly that's true. I only graduated in my degree 2 years ago in May of 2020. This whole timeline demonstrates my entire experience in software from my very first co-op job in 2017. But ever since I started at Diligent in May of 2019, I started to take on more roles. And as those roles increased, my opportunities increased. You can see in the bottom right there, there's a graph of my compensation over time. I'm not going to label those graphs out of respect for my employer, but you can see that just by putting in a certain amount of skill, soft skills, I was able to achieve these kinds of opportunities. But the truth is, I have a little bit of a special power, just a little. And what I'm about to show you is a video of me. This is me 10 years old. I have to reshare the screen so I can share sound. And I was on a singing competition. And this, my friends, is one of the most embarrassing moments of my life, which I am now sharing with all of you.
There was certainly no one better to close this honor roll with than Greg, who even got the judges carried away with some classic rock.
Well, I'm, if you can tell by the way I look, I'm a rocker guy, and there's not too many of those out here. Yeah. A gathering of angels appear above my head. Yeah. They sang to me this song of hope, and this is what they said. I know they said, come sail away, come sail away, come and sail away with me. Sail away, come and sail away with me.
So what does this clip actually say about me? Does it say that I'm a good singer? Absolutely not. It does not say that. But what it does say is that one of my special powers is the ability to go fully energetic into a situation and enthusiastically perform to the best of my ability. This is part of my personality trait. Not everyone has the ability to do this. Some people actually prefer to not cringe about their experiences from 10 years ago. But I show this because everyone has a unique set of personality and skills. And part of soft skills, the rules of soft skills, is to harness that. So the first rule that I want to share with you today is to understand yourself. So let's talk about personality tests. How many of you on the call have heard about the Myers-Briggs? Just show of hands, or emojis on React on the Zoom or something like that. Now, I am an ENTJ, I am an ISFP, all of that. Yeah, lots of people love. Yeah, they're fun.
Surrounded by Idiots, right? No, that's the book it comes from, Surrounded by Idiots.
Ah, there we go. I didn't know that.
Amazing. I highly recommend all of you to read it.
There you go. See, I learned something new today in my own presentation. There's certainly very fun tests to do. However, how many people have heard about the Insights profile? A lot of, it's sort of an adapted Myers-Briggs profile that a lot of workplaces use. I have blocks to represent my Insights personality test. Yeah, these are also fun.
Yeah.
And these have been around for probably 40 to 60 years. So they've been in our lexicon for a long time. And so psychologists have had a great chance to study these to see, hey, is this actually measuring something meaningful about your personality? And the reviews are in, science writer. One of the worst personality tests in existence, Angus Chen, journalist for Scientific America. Most personality psychologists regard the Myers-Briggs as little more than an elaborate fortune cookie. Robert Hogan, psychologist specializing in personality tests. They're fun, these tests, but they're not the most accurate way to represent your personality. So let's talk about a model that a lot of psychologists are using today, and over the past couple decades has a decent amount of research to back behind it. And that is the Big Five personality traits, otherwise known as the ocean traits. So let's go through them individually. The first one is openness. People who are high in openness tend to be very inventive and curious. If you have highly open people on your team, they tend to generate a lot of new and sometimes crazy ideas. People who are low in openness tend to be more consistent and a little bit cautious to try new things, but at least you can count on them. The next one is conscientiousness. Conscientious people are highly effective and highly organized. They plan and they execute really, really well. Highly conscientious people make excellent managers, make excellent leaders, makes excellent military personnel. On the other side, low conscientiousness people, they're a bit more extravagant, a bit more careless, a bit more chaotic. But of course, you can still be effective in your work if you're chaotic. You just need to sort of understand that this is the way that you are wired. The next one is extroversion. I think this is the one that most people know intuitively, right? Extroverted people, they're outgoing, they're energetic, they're social, they love to collaborate, they get energy from talking to people. Whereas introverts, people who are low in extroversion, tend to be a little more solitary, reserved, but also are able to collect a little more focused time during the day because they don't have that strong social urge that extroverts do. Next one is agreeableness. This one's actually one of my favorites when it comes to understanding how people work, because it ends up playing quite a bit in the workplace. Highly agreeable people tend to be described as friendly and compassionate. They're the yes people. They love just taking on any challenge that comes their way and doing their best to resolve it, even if that means they take on a little bit too much, or if they can get walked over a little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas highly disagreeable people are on the other end, right? They're critical, they're rational. They are the ones to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this idea. Maybe we should think about this other idea, my idea. But the problem is that highly disagreeable people are often right. And we really need highly disagreeable people on our team. Highly agreeable people make excellent transformational leaders. They really know how to motivate their team and their crowd towards a goal. Whereas highly disagreeable people make also excellent leaders, but not necessarily transformational ones, but thought leaders. Highly disagreeable people are the kind of people that can stand on stage in front of a crowd of 100,000 people booing them and say, all of you are wrong. Highly disagreeable people tend to be the ones that fundamentally transform our society. But sometimes they can be a little bit challenging if you have certain expectations on them. The last one is neuroticism. I'm not going to talk about neuroticism too much because it doesn't play out too often in the workplace. It's a little more useful in understanding your own emotional stability. I'm not going to talk about it too much here. If you doubt that this Big Five model is just as silly as some of the other personality tests that we looked at the beginning, I want you to take a look at this interactive map. This was a study done by a few psychologists. And what they did is they took Twitter, where anyone had their occupation listed, and categorized them into the Big Five categories, and then clustered them by their location. And you can see here on this interactive map that it tends to cluster very, very well with job type, right? You can see the software programmers tend to be very clustered away from the fashion marketers, who are clustered away from the politicians. And you can actually see that within software engineering itself, there's a variety of domains that people often choose depending on their personality. That the type of people that end up going into video game testing might be a little bit different in terms of Big Five than the type of people that, say, become Linux engineers. Of course, not all of this is set in stone. You can be an excellent fashion designer with the personality type of a Linux engineer and vice versa. But it's something to keep in mind that oftentimes in your work, the best way to succeed is to understand your personality traits and leverage those that you are strongest in and work with a team that complements your weaker points so that as a team, you can really exceed. For example, let's say you are a highly agreeable person. It might be a good idea to seek advice from someone who's highly disagreeable before moving on a design that affects the entire company. Maybe you're heavily introverted. It might be useful to ask your extroverted boss to help pull the team together, because that might be more challenging for you to do on your own. Maybe if you forget details a little bit, you're a little bit low in conscientiousness, find someone on the team that is very good with details, highly conscientious people, and do a code review with them to try to understand the kinds of things that they look for so that you can incorporate it into your own programming practice. Rule number 2, choose your company carefully. This one's really important, but it tends to be challenging sometimes because we get job descriptions like this: hiring full stack web developer, an obnoxious amount of emojis, requirements, front-end engineering, back-end engineering, mobile development, machine learning expertise, cloud infrastructure, background in information security, 10 plus years of Swift experience. Swift has only been around for 8 years at this point. You see lots of job postings like this. Clearly, this is someone who doesn't understand the amount of focus required to build an excellent software product. If you see a description like this, thank you, next.
Run away. I've never put an emoji in my job description.
Here's another one. This one, the last one was a bit of a joke, but this one is a little bit more real. So hiring software developer and test. Our mission is to make actionable health information accessible to everyone in the world, enabling early detection, intervention of disease, empowering individuals with information to live the lives that they want. Requirements seem fairly straightforward. It's a bachelor's degree in computer science, 3 years of industry experience, hands-on with Java, C++, whatever, right? This seems like a reasonable job description, except for the fact that this is a job description for Theranos, whose CEO was just arrested and charged with defrauding their investors, and also charged but not convicted of frauding their customers, because their product that they sold did not actually do the things that they claimed it does. It's really important that you do background research in the company that you're going to apply for. Thank you. Next. This one's interesting. This one's coming from Amazon. It seems like a pretty decent role, right? Software developer engineer 2 for Amazon. They found them based on their profile. They just want to do an interview. This is reasonable, right? Except the person who received this was Mark Rusinovich, who's the CTO of Azure. Maybe a little bit overqualified for that role. Thank you. Next. Choosing a company is hard, but it's really, really important. Just face it. A company is the kind of place where you're going to be spending 40+ hours a week fully focused on your career path. It's also the best place to network, because people who work at your company and then move on to other companies talk about your work, and that's how you get hired. Software is a small role. So it's really important that you find the right company. And there's 2 ways to tackle this: the right company in general and the right company for you. The right company in general, there's a lot of ways to model this. I really like this Westrum model. It was talked about in the book Accelerate. It also was talked about in Google's Cloud Architecture Center. And it basically describes 3 types of companies: pathological culture, bureaucratic culture, and generative culture. It's probably not going to surprise you that I'm going to recommend you seek out companies with a generative culture. But what is the difference between these? Pathological companies tend to have a power structure that's oriented towards a small handful of individuals, sometimes even one individual, who makes decisions solely based on whether or not it makes them look good, regardless of company, regardless of performance, regardless of your own self-esteem. Whereas on the bureaucratic side, it tends to be more rule-oriented. This is your role, and do not deviate from it, because we have other people in the company that are assigned other roles, and just stay in your lane, do the work, and in 20 years, you'll get promoted. Whereas generative cultures tend to be performance-oriented, tend to be motivated by the mission that they have set forth. And so often evaluate success based on how much you are pushing the vision forward. Of course, cooperation differs between these, whether or not you are bringing bad news, the messenger. Are messengers shot in pathological organizations, where you get mad at the person telling you bad news just because they're delivering bad news? Or are they not only trained, but also embraced, right? Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Let's have a conversation about it. The last point is really interesting too, about novelty. It's really important that a company is brave enough to try new things, because if they don't, they will end up stagnating. In pathological organizations, novelty that doesn't come from a few powerful individuals are crushed. Whereas in bureaucratic organizations, novelty isn't crushed. It's just, why are you trying to do things differently? We have the standards already in place, just follow them. Whereas in generative culture, novelty is embraced and implemented, because change is the only constant in software. Generative companies embrace that. In general, pathological companies do what I tell you. Bureaucratic companies do what's in your role. Generative companies do what moves us forward. So when you're looking for a company, how can you tell which category they're in? Well, a great starting source is reviews on Glassdoor, I find. Keep in mind that sometimes people get a little disgruntled and post the average outlier bad review. But in general, I find if you look at an aggregation of reviews, Glassdoor can be an excellent resource. Additionally, you can reach out to a current or former employee on LinkedIn, offer to buy them a coffee, and just hear their story. But the best part to find these sorts of questions is in the interview itself. You know that part when they ask, do you have any questions for me, the answer should always be yes. At the very least, ask them what their weaknesses are. Ha, take that, right? But in general, what you want to find in that interview is, does the vision of the company align with what you see the vision of the world to be in the future? Do the values of the company align with your own moral compass and fit into the kind of company culture that you want to work in? And can the company actually execute on its vision? Can it do good in the world? Or is it a lot of bravado with no foundation? It's really important that you discover these 3 traits, because the intersection of them can make for a meaningful company. But at the end of the day, no company is perfect. There is no such thing as a free lunch. So it's really important that you find out the kind of work that you want to do, the kind of culture that you want to be a part of, so that you can seek that out, embrace it, and ultimately, when you do get hired at those companies, participate and even change the culture for better. All right, let's take a quick motivation break. I've been talking for a while. I just want to say to everyone on this call, if you're at any way struggling in the forest, I'm going to give you one advice right now. It's going to change your life. Follow your passion. You've heard this, right? Every high school guidance counselor has told you this. And in fact, trends for follow your passion on Google have been trending upward over time for the past 30 years. I really love passion, especially when you look at the actual definition, which is a strong and barely controllable emotion, especially with respect to your work. I don't know about you, but I have strong, barely uncontrollable emotions when it comes to debugging test cases, dealing with production outages, sprint planning meetings, shred notes, barely uncontrollable urges, product deadlines, blockers from team dependencies. Look, if you aren't eating code for breakfast, what are you even doing here? Not sure if you've picked this up, but I don't think this is good advice. This takes me to rule 3, hone a craftsman mindset, not a passion-based mindset. What's the difference? Well, this comes from one of my favorite books of all time. And if you're starting out, I highly recommend this book. It's called So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport. The core point of this book is that what a craftsman does is a craftsman hones their skill over time and becomes highly skilled in something that's highly specialized. And what they're able to do eventually is trade those skills for meaningful work, for meaningful properties about their work. I'm going to paraphrase an ex-president. Ask not what your career can do for you, but what you can do for your career. Set yourself in a position for success. Focus on building up those rare and valuable skills and trade those in for a great job. So good they can't ignore you, rare and valuable skills, hone a craftsman mindset, not a passion-based mindset. This whole idea of trading in skills for better life conditions may seem kind of weird, but you're used to this already in the form of money. Money is just one thing you can kind of trade for. Some people like to think that a world would be a lot better without money, and certainly obsession with money is unhealthy. But I think people forget what money is, which is just a tool that allows you to trade, so that when I go to a coffee shop and say, yes, I'd like one coffee, please, they don't have to say, well, what do you have to offer in return? And I have to, offer things like, oh, wow, I could optimize the hell out of your database, or, oh man, your Jira board, I could clean that up right away. I am so good with Slack communication. Turns out that baristas don't need those skills. The best part is that I can find someone who does need those skills and trade them for a cup of coffee plus a little bit of extra dollars. Same is true with your career. So you might be asking, okay, you're talking about honing a craftsman mindset. You're talking about developing rare and valuable skills, but how do I do that? How do I become rare and valuable? How do I become an expert? Well, there are many ways to do it, but the best one that psychologists recommend now is called deliberate practice. The idea that you're not just practicing in terms of setting a time, doing the repetitive task, and then stopping and making a routine out of that, but that you're actively honing on the things, the skills that you struggle with. So this is a multi-step process. The first one is to develop a mental model of your skill set. That mental model might start off with, I don't even know how to program. I don't even know what a computer is. But with that mental model, you can start to define the limitations of your knowledge and your skill. Once you define those limitations, it's very easy to then target those areas, right? Set well-defined and specific goals and focus intensely on those growth areas. Your practice, your deliberate practice sessions should be uncomfortable. They should be a little painful because learning is just like working out, right? No pain, no gain. You're stretching your muscle and you're stretching your skill beyond what you thought was possible. But once you do that, an important part of deliberate practice is also making sure that you're receiving feedback from others. If you're a musician trying to play an instrument, play for other people. If you're a software engineer trying to learn a new technology, find a mentor who's proficient in that technology to give you code review. And last but not least, reflect on your process and your progress. Could you have done this a little bit differently to learn faster? Could you have re-engineered this process to make it more likely that you continued this deliberate practice sessions in the future? Deliberate practice is a great way to hone skills, especially if you have a mental model of an existing skill that you really want to become an expert in. But how do you approach an area where you have absolutely no idea where to start? I think many engineers experience this when they dive into a new code base and they say, oh, wow, this complicated subsystem, I have no idea what's going on here. And the only person who could know would be someone who's been working here for years. Generally, that's not true. And my recommendation here, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and come back to that slide because I went out of order. My recommendation here is to utilize the Feynman technique. Richard Feynman was probably one of the most brilliant minds alive at the time. He was a physicist, developed a lot of quantum physics and generally really passionate about learning. Some of his physics lectures are one of the best on the planet. But he also developed this technique born from the idea that the best way to learn something is to teach. Because when we teach, we restructure the neural pathways in our minds to better organize the information. So how would you utilize a Feynman technique? Well, I would start by trying to create an explanation in my head, or maybe even on paper, based on the knowledge that I know, which at this stage is nothing. Let's take a technology like AWS CDK. Right? This is a hot topic right now. Maybe I'm just coming into AWS CDK. I've heard a little bit on the side. My explanation might be something like, AWS CDK is a tool that allows you to create infrastructure from code. It's similar to other tools like Terraform and AWS SAM, but I've heard that it's good with IAM permissions, but I don't even know what those are or what that even means. So you can already see in the explanation, I'm identifying known unknowns, areas of knowledge that I'm a little bit shaky about and that I want to sort of dive in. Focus on those areas in your explanation, research, clarify, and rewrite. So now your explanation for CDK might be similar to the one before, except you might then go and say, well, the reason why IAM permissions, which control access to resources in AWS, is important to have done in CDK. What makes it more valuable is the fact that CDK creates those IAM permissions under the hood, whereas other tools like Terraform, you have to provide them up front. And so that extra layer of abstraction allows you to move faster. Finally, remove the technical jargon and see if you can describe that same explanation to a 12-year-old. This might seem a little weird in tech, right? I mean, we're so used to technical jargon because it's so useful. But the reason why this is an important step is because it really gets you to understand, to see if you understand the fundamentals. What is the actual organizational structures behind the thing that I'm studying? Because if a 12-year-old can understand it, you can always add in that technical jargon back. But by re-evaluating the fundamentals, you might want to make sure that you fully understand what's going on from a high-level perspective as well as a low-level perspective. Then once you have your explanation, your technical explanation, as well as your high-level explanation that you could give to a 12-year-old, then you're ready to teach others. And this is really important that you don't skip this step, because in my view, this is the step that is most important. Because when you teach others, it is very easy to see your misconceptions, your unknown unknowns, and address them, because other people have questions. Other people bring a new framework to the table that allows you to uncover your knowledge gaps. And then from there, the cycle continues. as you try to create an explanation to address those, identify the unknown unknowns, so on and so forth. And you can use this technique to go as deep as you want. I would caution against one thing though. Avoid the amateur plateau. This is probably one of the biggest reasons why a lot of engineers tend not to get promoted past a certain level. It's that they acquire a certain amount of skills, they become proficient in that skill, and then it just becomes easy enough to do the work. They don't feel challenged anymore. And so they can go in, do their projects, go home, and repeat. But they never actually end up making the organization better, other than the very narrow goals that are defined. It's really important that you continue using deliberate practice, find the techniques, or whatever techniques you have to acquire and hone either new skills or get deeper into the skills that you're really good at, so that you can always accelerate your career from where you are today. Which brings us to number 4. We've talked about teaching a lot and understanding new knowledge, but a really important part of the job, a part that is often overlooked, and a part that we heard a lot about in our breakout rooms, was about communication. This was a soft skill that I kept coming up because it's so important. Communication is key. To understand how key communication is, I'm not going to show you a 15-minute video, but I am going to show you the first minute of a history video about the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. I chose this topic because not a lot of people on this call would necessarily immediately seek out this subject. But look at the way that this journalist, Johnny Harris, introduces the topic so that he can spend 15 minutes on Haitian and Dominican Republic history by drawing us in with an excellent hook.
Pause here. I'm driving on the road that separates Haiti from the Dominican Republic. Right here. It's the border that divides two very different countries. If you're born in Haiti, you're 2.5 times more likely to die as a baby than if you're born in the DR. You'll be almost 10 times poorer, and you can expect to have a much shorter life. I came here to find out how the two countries that share this one island can be so different. With a politically volatile and impoverished Haiti on one side, and the stable and relatively rich Dominican Republic on the other. How did this line produce two totally different worlds?
So you can see there, the rest of the video is 15 minutes of history. But just in that 1 minute, the journalist managed to introduce who he was, introduce the topic that he was going to talk about, give the audience a question to ponder, and furthermore, have them want to learn the history to understand that question. How does this relate to software engineering? Well, you'll notice that throughout that introduction, there is a use of what's called visual anchors, a piece of evidence that goes towards the main point, the main thesis of the video. The main thesis of the video wasn't even expressed in that intro, but yet he started with images of those two places and what it's like on the border and what it's like to live there. He started with the evidence. This is very different than what we've seen in school, where they tell you point, proof, explain in your writing. It's a very structured form of writing. It's also a very boring form of writing. What I recommend instead in your presentations, and this extends not only to video, but also audio presentations, also written presentations, also communicative presentations of information like Slack or email, is start with the visual anchor, start with the reason why someone should care about this, and then go into the context. Don't start with the context. Tell me why I should care first. Communication is about telling a good story. So show people why they should care. As I said, this takes many forms. In presentations, start with a visual anchor. Start with, if you're making a technical demo, start with the software working, right? You don't have to lead up to it As long, maybe you're really good at building tension, right? Maybe you're Quentin Tarantino and can spend the first 10 minutes of your movie talking about a Big Mac before the big scene. You're probably not actually Quentin Tarantino, though. You probably just want to start with the cool thing that you want to show and then provide the context. If you show work in software, then people will be like, oh, how does that work? That's so cool. Even in Slack and email, you can start with the visual anchor. In this case, Slack and email, the visual anchor is the most important information. What do you need from this person? What do you want them to know? The 1 to 2 sentences. Don't start with a huge paragraph. They're not going to read it. 1 to 2 sentences, maybe even in bold. Then the context you can bring in later. You can have information in bullet points. I would highly recommend bullet points over paragraphs. Lists are also great. But try to find a way that the person knows what you're trying to tell them immediately. And then if they want more information, they can find it. In Slack, I recommend using Slack threads to hide technical details for only those that are interested in the top level visual anchor that you set. In written documentation, it's fairly similar. I recommend sort of a 3-step approach where in a written documentation, say Confluence documentation, you might start with the vision, the goal, the thing you're trying to achieve, the end result. Then you're probably going to have multiple sections because technical documentation can often be complicated and interleaving. So I would anchor each section with the diagram because a picture often paints 1,000 words, and that will give the reader a chance to sort of look at it, understand it, stew with it before you then jump into the actual explanation of the architecture. So the context there is the explanations, the code snippets. The visual anchor is your architecture diagrams or your vision. In general, with presentations and demos, I recommend show them the physical evidence and then tell them what's happening. In Slack and email, it's the other way around. Tell them what they need to know and then show them the details. In written documentation, give an outline of what they should expect by the end, then show them the diagrams, then tell them what's going on. In one-on-one communication, I just want to briefly talk about this as well. It's a little bit different. One-on-one communication is interesting because egos often get in the way, where we communicate what we know without trying to make sure that the other person we're talking to is coming along with us. I really like this Albert Einstein quote. I never teach my pupils. I only attempt to provide them the conditions in which they can learn. My recommendation here is, especially if you're talking about something highly technical, if you're explaining something to someone else, have them drive the discussion. Even though you have the knowledge, have them drive the discussion. Have them summarize their understanding from their point of view, and then introduce information in little bits at a time and give them the opportunity to ask lots of questions along the way. On the other side, if you're the one that doesn't have the knowledge, being told the information, always make sure you find the time to summarize what they're telling you so that you demonstrate that you understand, or perhaps demonstrate that you don't understand, and give them a chance to correct your misconceptions. And of course, always ask questions along the way before moving on to the next topic. It's time for Rule 5, which is the last rule. And that is something I picked up from one of the leaders of this talk itself. And that is, I don't know if you can see it. Yep, there we go. Success is inevitable. In other words, cultivate a good attitude. And work is not always going to be sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes it's going to be challenging. Sometimes you're going to have to debug test cases where it says, oh, I expected 1 to be 1. Why is this failing? Sometimes you're going to hit setbacks in your project. Sometimes you're going to have communication barriers that make things difficult. But in general, if you believe that with the right mindset, you can cultivate success yourself, well, cultivate success yourself along with your team and the rest of your company, you will achieve it. You may have to redefine what success is along the way, but you will achieve success if you have the right mindset. In fact, the only way that this is not true is if you don't believe it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but in a good way, right? As soon as you start to believe that failure is possible, you've entered the door to start to get up. So if you really care about a goal, if you really care about the success of your company, of your project, just repeat it to yourself. Even when you're most demoralized. Success is inevitable. That's it. That's soft skills for software engineers. Understand yourself, choose your company carefully, hone a craftsman mindset. Communication is key. Success is inevitable. I'm Greg Gzik. If you want to find me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to add anyone on this call. I will say for any recruiters on this call, I am taken. So you may find a barrier there, but I'm more than happy to help out if you have any questions about soft skills, if you want any mentoring, or if you are even above me in the career and want to mentor me, I'm more than happy to reach out. Why don't we go ahead and pause for questions or comments, or if you have any discussion points of your own, please, let's use this time.
Oh, thank you, Greg. That was a really inspiring presentation for me, and it really motivates me a lot. So I am really interested in communication as well. And so I guess that there are some opportunities that you have to give a very short presentation, like 30 seconds or 60 seconds. So I strongly agree that it is very good to start with the why, like Simon Sinek mentions. So, but in that kind of short time period, it would be extremely difficult to, give a good story to, move people's mind. So do you have any idea to, on a good way to structure a good story on such a short time period?
Yeah, awesome question. So let's take the reverse. Let's say you don't try to tell a story. Let's just say you word vomit all of the technical details at once. How much is someone really going to learn in 60 seconds? Probably not a ton. My recommendation there is going to be pretty similar. Start with the most important thing. Start with the visual anchor, and then provide the opportunity for someone to learn more at the end, right? Say, here's a link to the code. Here's a link to a technical documentation. Come talk to me later and we can chat more about the details. But again, I would not leave out why. The why is what draws people in.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It's a great question.
Greg, I have one question for you. So you are only 25. How did you pick up all these soft skills in such a short amount of time? You're only 2 years out of school. Do you have any tips on how you were able to amass such a, why? Like, do you just happen to read a lot, listen to all podcasts? Just wondering how you acquire all this knowledge.
Yeah, great question, especially because it's extremely flattering to me. I would say that it's really important that you don't wait for permission to do things, right? You don't have to think, oh, I'm going to be this title in this amount of years, or, oh, I can't take on this project because I'm too young or I don't have enough experience. You can always try your best. So always take on something with a positive attitude, cultivate that attitude of success is inevitable. The other thing I would say is always make sure that you're listening to new ideas. I always listen to a thread of audiobooks. I have 3 or 4 audiobooks going at once right now. I always try to fill in that time. And remember that you can pick up insights from various sources. I'm not saying that you need to spend all of your free time, listening to audiobooks about coding, right? You can listen to audiobooks about whatever interests you, but you would be surprised just how much knowledge is in a book that you won't find on the internet or you won't find in communication. The third thing I would say is always be willing to hear someone out. It sort of goes back to that ocean personality of being agreeable or disagreeable. If you're highly agreeable, this is a little bit easier for you because you could say, oh yeah, tell me more. Absolutely, right? It's part of your nature. If you're disagreeable, what I would do is instead of voicing your feedback right away, when someone tells you a piece of information that might be different to your framework, take the time to ask questions and understand and summarize their point of view. And then if they want your feedback on this, on their framework, then you can provide that feedback. But quite often I find that with highly disagreeable people, they sort of interject their feedback initially before the other person has had a chance to really spell out their idea. And what ends up happening is information is just lost both ways, right? the disagreeable person doesn't get the full context of the framework, and the agreeable person doesn't get the full chance to really outline their vision. And so they're probably going to turn their ears off when you recommend any type of criticism. So yeah, always be reading, always listen to others, and don't wait for permission to do things.
Great reply. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments,
I
concerns?
have a quick question. I want to say thank you. This has been very refreshing. It was good to kind of review all these things that and learn new things and review things that we forgot about. Would this talk be available on YouTube? Because I understand that it was being recorded. So that's my question.
Yes, absolutely. I've given James lots of opportunity to make edits along the way, but I do believe that eventually it will be available online. I know my parents have said that they wanted to see this, despite the fact that neither of them are engineers. So at the very least, it will be available to them and probably available to you online as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
One more
next few
question.
days.
Sorry, Yusuf. We'll post in the next few days.
The next few days? Okay, good. That's great. And one more question. So how did you find yourself in Diligent? Like, how were you introduced to this company? And what was your introduction and what drew you to this company?
Yeah, so I was looking for a co-op term in 2019. I had worked for 2 companies previously, and I found Diligent. At the time, they were called ACL, and then eventually changed their name to Galvanize, and then eventually got bought out by Diligent. But I found them because I really liked the product that they were building. I really liked that they were an enterprise software company doing good for the world, and also that they had a large amount of stability as well. At the time, I think the company had been in business for 30 years, but also when I spoke to employees there, it was very clear that this company was going to grow into something very big. And I still feel that sense of urgency today. As we've gone on, I will say that the company has changed quite a bit. It does feel like a very different company from where I started versus where we are today. But that change is sort of what keeps me here, right? I'm excited to see where the company is going to be a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And that kind of change is something that I didn't get at my previous levels of employment. That hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Had a really good listen. That's all. Don't worry, I'm not going to poach you.
Well, I really appreciate some of the comments that you gave throughout the talk too. I didn't know about
I love this kind of stuff. You hit the nail on the head. Really entertaining. Just to stroke your ego. I love that you don't say and like and and like and like. So great takeaways. And I love your examples of the recruiters' job specs as well. So thank you so much. If you're in downtown,
you aren't sending job descriptions like that in your career.
No. But yeah, no. Anytime anyone wants to connect, including yourself, for a coffee, it'd be good to just have fun. And I'm learning more about how to be in your shoes. And communication is royalty. So to piggyback on one of your points. Anyone who is trying to communicate and you have that type of person that bulldozes the conversation, you are allowed to politely say, hold on, let me finish because I'm trying to understand this to help you. So don't be scared to communicate. That's what I find.
Yeah, absolutely. It's super important that you're on the same page, because if you aren't, then 6 months later, you might ask yourself, oh, wait, we shouldn't have gone down this path in the first place. Yeah. The company will have wasted 6 months worth of resources. So even if that person is a senior or a principal or a director or your boss, always make sure you are aligned on the information.
That's right.
And if they don't let you, you might be working for a pathological company.
Greg, I'm reading off a question that I think was sent to me straight by mistake by another James Douglas. Do you know the book How to Make Friends and Influence People, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, great book. It's classic. A little bit it is a classic. It's a little old school, but I kind of appreciate it for that. It does sort of have that classic feel. I will say that my perspective of the book is that it is written for someone who is highly agreeable already. So keep that in mind. I do think that, for example, the book starts off with the advice of never disagree. Maybe that does work when making friends, but I would recommend against that in your work. It's important to disagree. You just need to disagree respectfully and disagree in a way that invites conversation, not shuts it down. But yeah, in general, How to Win Friends and Influence People's excellent book.
I wanted a question from my side. So we kind of touched sort of indirectly about this. I want to talk about self-awareness, right? So a lot of the soft skills come from practicing a software or learning comes also from self-awareness. So my question to you is, how did you cultivate that? How did you, or what tools did you use to become more self-aware about your strengths and skills? I know you touched on some tests that you did as well, but what were the things that for you worked and were most effective?
Yeah, really important there is failing fast, putting out your ideas in the forefront and asking for feedback, trying not to steamroll your ideas through, because your ideas, you sort of have to re-envision yourself. Criticism is not meant to tear you down. It's to help bring you up, right? And it's to help bring up the whole organization. So really get your ideas out there, really get your personality out there, and listen to feedback when people tell you it, and appreciate feedback. Sometimes, especially because, Canadians are very polite. We're in a polite culture. Sometimes it's very difficult to get honest feedback from someone. But when someone gives it to you, thank them. Say, thank you for the feedback. I really appreciate it. Ask them questions about the feedback. Try not to get defensive. Try to let go of that ego. And if you do see that ego come in, notice it. Even journal about it and try to understand, well, why did that come in the first place? What about this conversation started to trigger it? And look, I've been certainly guilty of ego-driven conversations in the past. So I don't want to say that I am perfect or that I have all the answers in any way, shape, or form. But it's something that I actively work on to try to get better over time. Was I muted the whole time?
No, sorry, that was me by mistake.
Okay. Yuri posted a survey in the chat for folks who haven't filled it out yet. Please take some time to fill it out. I'll really appreciate it because we're trying to figure out how to evolve this into something that's useful for everyone here. I really appreciate the amount of different occupations that came out here, whether it's different levels, junior, senior, principal, whether it's different roles, engineers, recruiters. I see folks in product in here. Really, really appreciate it. We need as much of your feedback and as much of your engagement as possible.
Awesome.
Thanks again, Greg. I got to shoot, but brilliant presentation. Have a good evening, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks, Piers. If we don't have any more questions, then leave it. Oh, sorry. There is one that just came in. Curl, you seem to have an unwavering patience. Does that come natural or something you worked on?
Yeah, it sort of goes, it's a similar question to the awareness question. Some of it is natural for sure. But some of it is noticing in myself when I am impatient and really trying to do sort of a 5 whys root cause analysis as to what about this made me impatient, and be honest with yourself, right? Sometimes there are things that make you impatient that have nothing to do with the quality or the content, but have everything to do with the fact that you're not taking proper care of yourself. I tend to be guilty of impatience when I don't get enough sleep, for instance. So make sure that you fully understand the times that you're impatient, document those, and try to understand, even just a little bit of observability can go a long way. If you're in the middle of a conversation and you start, interrupting because you're a little bit impatient and you want to get it done, just notice that in that moment why you're interrupting, and just that observability can help you sort of modulate your tone and modulate your actions and form a much healthier conversation. The other thing I'd say is admit when you're being impatient, right? It's okay to say, hey, man, I'm sorry, I was impatient in that conversation. What did you have to say? I believe I cut you off, right? Just talk about those openly. Because again, whenever that ego gets in the way, it's going to prevent you from learning and growing.
I think we have another question from Al, raising his hand.
Hi. First of all, as everybody said, great presentation. I'm a big fan of the Big Five, Feynman method, and Cal Newport. So it's like, it was great
Awesome.
that you brought all three of them together. My question is, that chart you showed regarding the Big Five, where given your Big Five, it tells you what career or whatever, what's more suitable. Is there a particular website that you can enter your Big Five and it will tell you what your best match is in terms of career?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I don't know the answer to that question. This particular map came source itself and export it there. What I will say to that question though is, while it's useful to show that certain personalities tend to congregate in certain professions, I wouldn't try to go the other way, that because you have a certain personality, you should go into this profession. Don't tend to use it as predictive. And I think even on the Wikipedia page about the Big Five, it also warns against this, that psychologists don't find a heavily predictive power with respect to Big Five and workplace success. It's more about just that Big Five personalities tend to cluster together.
Very good.
An observation that I'll turn into a question for you, Greg.
Yeah.
Having worked with you for a couple of years now, I know that from the beginning, you have an innate skill in knowing your audience and understanding the perspective of the people that you're dealing with. So if you're dealing with somebody in product, you're dealing with someone in dev, you're dealing with someone junior or senior, you tailor the message for them. Is that something that you're doing naturally? Is that something you trained yourself to do? Is that something you read about and tried to do?
Yeah, so great question. Yeah, I would say it's something that, especially if I'm presenting sort of a prepared set of material, it's something that I'm always thinking about. Even in this presentation today, there were a number of slides that I ended up cutting because it didn't fit the kind of audience that both A, came today, and B, that I wanted to come tomorrow. So it's really important. Like, it sort of goes back to that point about even one-on-one communication, making sure that the person you're talking to is always following along with you. And so, whether or not is this natural or did I have to learn this? Yeah, certainly I've had to, I've been in plenty of conversations where I've given some amount of information and someone clearly wasn't following along. And I've received feedback from my first manager at the co-op that I was working on, that I had a tendency to steamroll projects and steamroll information. And there, quite frankly, there still is a little bit about that in my personality, but just him pointing that out, right? Going back to that idea of always making sure you're listening to feedback, just him pointing that out sort of got me to reflect on making sure that I'm always bringing the audience along with me. And in order to do that, you need to understand how to communicate in a way that the audience appreciates.
Any others?
There's lots of really great insights in the chat too. I haven't read through all of them, but please do when you get a chance. I wonder if, James, do you know if there's a way that we could somehow make that available, whether it, I don't know, in the YouTube description or something like that? There's a ton of really useful insights here that I want to make sure we capture.
We could. I know that they are saved when we stop recording, so I'll definitely keep a copy, and we'll find a way to publish them.
Yeah, even we can edit out some of the like the thank yous and the +1s and stuff like that, and just say here's some of the insights from the crowd at this presentation.
For sure, we can also publish them on our Slack group. So
that's a good idea.
That's also a possibility. Awesome. Then thank you so much, Greg. Always passionate and I don't use it lightly. And great content as well. Thank you so much for your insights, and thanks everybody for attending and everybody who replied to our survey and to help us sort of improving these events. We're looking forward to the next one already. And with that, have a good evening, have a good Wednesday, and see you next time.
Thank you so much, everyone.